Welcome to the Doctor Who Missing Episodes podcast. My name is Tim, and I'm joined here in our secret Missing Episodes vault by Paul.
Hello. Yes, as Tim says, we're broadcasting live from Addis Ababa in our secret underground Missing Episodes vault. So-called because it's completely missing any episodes of anything, really. To be honest, it's just a vault.
Anyway, what we'll be doing during this little podcast project is simply reviewing those early Doctor Who stories affected by missing episodes in turn. We'll be looking at the background to the stories themselves, any commercial DVD or Blu-ray releases, and then maybe we'll see if we fancy any of them being recovered.
Yep, the stories behind the backgrounds, the stories behind those stories, maybe even the stories behind the stories behind the stories. I mean, that could go on. Are we going to do the recovered stories?
Well, I wouldn't mind talking about Tomb of the Cybermen and Enemy of the World, for instance. We can be selective, can't we?
Yeah, play it by ear. Talking of which, that was a rather quirky tune you played at the start. Shades of Galaxy 4, I thought.
Yes, Shades of Galaxy 4, indeed. Well, initially, I was going to play in some Marco Polo incidental music, but it was a bit dull. I might, if we're lucky, I might play it underneath some of our conversation at some point.
Oh, goody.
To add a bit of texture, but it was dull and zithery. So that's 79p on Amazon, I won't get back. But then, in overreaction to that dullness, I mashed up, as the kids say, Wouldn't It Be Nice by the Beach Boys, rather a fitting missing episode sentiment, with Hartnell's speech from the Dalek Invasion of Earth / Five Doctors. And then I threw in a bit of the old Cybermen music. And
wow.
Yeah.
That sounds... Wow. That sounds amazing.
It was horrific.
Oh.
Vomit-inducing.
Oh, go on.
What?
Play it. Come on, you can't tease us like that.
Yes, but we've already lost the 3 listeners that... Oh, well, if no one's listening, I guess I can play it. Here we go.
One day, I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine.
I think that was rather haunting.
I don't know if you've recorded a podcast before, Paul, but if anything goes awry, we just push on. We're professionals, we just push on. We're very unlikely to stop recording if you fluff a line or something. So we just push through and carry on.
Right. But if I do...
Well, if you desperately need to redo something, the best thing you can do is swear. We can't put that out.
Oh, okay. Like...
Yes, like that, Paul.
Or, I don't know...
Exactly.
Or... Tim, you absolute...
That's enough, Paul. Thank you. Thank you.
Is that everything?
I think so. I mean, if you desperately need a drink from too much yakking, just go and lick the walls there. They're dripping.
Yeah. Might just take a sip from my gourd, actually.
I wouldn't do that. Anyway, shall we crack on?
Let's.
Marco Polo, Serial D. So you can be there, happily watching 13 weeks worth of this nascent early Doctor Who.
Good word.
Then, like someone dropping a grand piano on your head, crang, you're missing the next 7.
I know. Like running into a brick wall, isn't it? A brick wall of emptiness and disappointment.
It's remarkable, isn't it? And it's like when you watch one of the Orphans as well. You just think, right, next episode we carry on, and you can't.
Yeah, the Orphan episode 1s are the worst, aren't they? All the different episode positions have their strengths and weaknesses, but when you have a gripping episode 1 and then the rest is silence, it's just desolate, isn't it?
Such There aren't any.
Web of Fear.
The Web of... well, yeah, okay, fair enough.
The best episode of Web of Fear, the single best orphan episode, I always thought back in the day.
Yeah.
I may have changed my opinion since then. I'll tell you at the end of this, of our own marathon run through what's left. But I always thought it was textbook 25 minutes of Doctor Who.
Yes, indeed.
Web of Fear 1, and for all those years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
Now you get to watch episode 2 as well. Before it stops. But anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Oh dear. Yes. Yes, it's jarring. It's jarring. And it's a sort of ridiculous project that we're undertaking in that we're trying to do a review of the most difficult stuff to review.
I guess the point to make about Marco Polo is that it's not just a gap, even though it's not even just quite a long gap. It's the first gap, and it's a gap at a point where the programme is continuing to evolve and takes a rapid change of gears, sort of exponential growth in so many ways, the characters and the storytelling, and it would be really nice to see that.
Yes,
we can tell what's happening.
Yeah,
but
interesting, isn't it? And yeah, it just feels like it should be there as well, because so much of those first 2 years are complete. It feels even more adrift because we should have a copy, arguably, and we have so much of everything else in those first couple of years. I've always thought of it as well as a companion piece to the Daleks, in that it rounds off that first few months. I'm not saying it's intentional, but just in my sort of headcanon, you've got this sci-fi 7-parter with the Daleks, where they're on an alien planet, and this is the return, if you like. This is the historical 7-parter, and in the Daleks, the characters don't get on very well, and the Doctor is completely unknowable, whereas in this second 7-parter, and we'll get onto the characterization later on, the Doctor is somewhat more of a known quantity, even though he's erratic. Does that make sense? It
does, and it's again another reason why this story is in such a unique position. It's both the start of something new. I think that's how people mostly look at it, because at this point the Doctor's problems with his new companions have been ironed out, and it's the start of him becoming the slow path towards him just becoming a more obviously heroic figure. But it's, as well as being the start of something new, it's the end, as you say, of that first block in which we see pretty much everything laid out. In terms of the plans put in place by Sidney Newman and David Whittaker, this programme's going to be forwards, backwards and sideways, wasn't it?
Yeah. Future,
historical and other. An Unearthly Child is generally agreed not to be a proper historical. It's so other. I mean, yes, it's just prehistory rather than history, but more to the point, it's before recorded history. It might as well be an alien planet. It's just so out there that I think it almost counts more as one of the sideways stories like Edge of Destruction.
But it's interesting, in agreement with that, it's interesting that they choose Marco Polo as the subject of the first historical proper, in that the accuracy of the history is unknown. Because my thorough research for this podcast, because I started wondering why it was Marco Polo, and I never did Marco Polo at school. I did a little Twitter survey.
I'm a little older than you. I didn't either.
No, my parents did in the 50s. And of the 40 people who did my little Twitter survey, I think 2 or 3 said they had. Richard thinks he did. But it was so long ago for him. I mean,
I can just picture him making notes on Marco Polo's travels with his quill pen.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. In the 50s, there was something of a Marco Polo mania. My research has pointed out. When I say research, it's basically Wikipedia and asking my parents. There was a new Penguin edition of the memoir in '58, which was a bestseller. And prior to that, John Lucarotti had written a multi-part radio drama for CBC Canada. 16-part, I think it was.
16.
Yeah. A drama which he then borrowed aspects of for this.
Yep.
But my point being that
all those people who think this is too long should count their blessings?
My point being that the actual history of Marco Polo is impossible to get back to what the truth of it is. Marco Polo was in prison due to some civil difficulty with Genoa, I think, or something, and he apparently dictated his memoir to a cellmate, and this was in 1290 or something like that, and it has been mistranslated so many times that there are 150 versions out there.
Good Lord, even more than the Bible.
And there's all sorts of textual analysis that's gone on to discern which was true and which wasn't, and they can't quite get to the nub of what was true. There have been queries as to whether he actually went to China at all, based on observations like he never mentions the Great Wall. He never mentions bound feet. But so there's been this academic debate raging about whether he actually went. I think they now think he did go, and that some of the tales...
Just not very observant.
No, I think it might have been in a state of disrepair, the sections that he should have seen or something.
Right.
That it's been pointed out that two others who have given accounts of medieval China at the same time have also failed to mention the Great Wall. I say all of that as to whether it's a factual history, whereas when you get later on to the Reign of Terror or something like that, you can be more sure of the facts because it's more recent.
Do you think that has much bearing on the story that John Nicoretti presents us? It's not... I mean, if it was being written now, then it would explicitly... The point of the story would be a bit like the Robin Hood version episode we got recently. It would be about seeing the discrepancy between what travellers had grown up believing and their reality, wouldn't it? But it's not played that way at all.
No. It's played straight, and it's believed to be straight by John Nicoretti, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, I find it interesting that it's a bit of history that isn't taught now and isn't thought about now, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe it's because China has opened up somewhat, and so it's less of a mysterious place. I don't know.
But there's also been a massive shift in the syllabus, the school syllabus in terms of history, hasn't there? I don't know what you got. By my time, it was much more recent. We had a very brief overview of world history at primary school, and then by the time we got to secondary school, it was things that were considered relevant. What is the relevance of Marco Polo to a broad understanding of history? I wonder. Maybe it's just there for a bit of colour. So
we've touched on it already, but let's talk a little bit about the effect of the extension of the show's initial 13 weeks to the full year.
Yeah.
So as you've said, as you've alluded to earlier, this is the start of the second block of recording, in that the first 13 episodes were commissioned. It wasn't certain at some point in that run whether they would carry on beyond that, and then this is the start of Perma-Who.
Yes, with a tiny asterisk caveat, which is that it was commissioned for a second 13,
right,
which is Marco Polo and Keys. Turned out to be Marco Polo and Keys of Marinus.
Right.
The first 13, the fact that, as we've said, the setup is consolidated by the end of Edge of Destruction, all the misunderstandings have gone, and the team are united and ready to forge on into their new life of exploration. The fact that is set up by the end of the first 13, do you think that was David Whittaker's way of positioning himself so that it would work as a good ending? If that was it, if Doctor Who finished at that point, that would have been a good ending, but it's also a good springboard for the future, because if so, that's quite cunning.
Yeah, maybe. The overriding impression I get from the production aspect of the first 13 is that they're flying by the seats of their pants, aren't they? Both in terms of the scripts and the...
Some very ingenious storytelling has been born out of necessity.
Yes.
But having at the end of the first 13 episodes resolved all the initial conflict, we then, in Marco Polo, see for the first time our team playing more as a unit, and I guess really, whichever story it ended up here, that's what we would have seen. It would have been the first time people had seen the Doctor continuing to soften.
We also see them relax and be confident in what they're doing, in that the production itself feels more confident. I think Waris Hussain has spoken about it was a lot more relaxed. But we also see them actually going for what the absolute apex of what the original conception was, whereas they haven't done that up to this point. So they're thickly, deeply involved in the history. It's absolutely riddled with educational points for the kiddos, which we'll talk about. And then we see the characters all starting to conform more to the little pen picks that were provided before they started the first 13, if that makes sense. So you see Barbara being the history teacher and the negotiator. You see Ian being the hero. You see Susan being the teenage girl with the teenage girlfriend. And you see the Doctor being irascible, brilliant, unpredictable, erratic, all the rest of it. And you don't see them this crystallized in their characters before this point.
No. And I mean, they had space to do this in the Daleks, for example. They had space, but because Terry Nation isn't that sort of writer, the characters are just sketched quite thinly. Ian, Doctor is just the scientist, and Ian is just the man of action.
Yeah.
And even though there's plenty of room, it's all plot and all excitement and all action. Whereas here, there is plenty of room.
Yeah.
Plus, John Lucarotti is probably a better writer. He didn't have Nation's career, but
No.
I don't think it's not a controversial thing to say, is it?
No, it's not.
I think he is.
Yes. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty of reviewing it, how did you watch it, Paul? How did you enjoy this in preparation?
On this occasion, as probably I always will, I watched the most recent, the second loose cannon reconstruction, which they... is my mind playing tricks on me? They hadn't only just finished the painstaking attempts to produce to recolour thousands of publicity photographs and produce their colour recon. And then the day afterwards, the telesnaps were found. I feel like that's what happened.
So we both watched it. Did we like it, Paul?
Goodness me, yes. Yes, I
wonderful.
find it... I've got to be honest, I sort of relaxed into it. I suppose I should have been watching it with laser eyes, trying to discern a new take on it. But really, I'm so familiar with it now. It feels like a comfy pair of slippers of a story. I don't know. I find it rather hypnotic and just and warm.
It really works for me. The first 3 episodes in particular really work for me, because you are seeing this ostentatious display of educational notes. You're seeing... It's good kids' TV. The villain is utterly villainous. The 4 characters are all doing what they should do. They've all got an equal share of things to do. And, yeah, it just tickles me in all the right places.
In terms of being good children's TV, I think I like the fact that it's told with great clarity,
Yes.
but without being overly simplistic. So Marco Polo is obvious. You know that Marco Polo is the hero, and that Tagana is the villain. But they make an attempt to give them a little bit of depth, to play them with a little bit of subtlety.
Certainly to Marco
I mean,
Polo.
the review in About Time complains that they're searching around for a complaint, but it says that Tagana is so obviously moustache twirling that it's slightly implausible that Marco doesn't pick on him sooner. But I think they keep just the right side of making Marco look stupid. I think because we understand what's at stake for all of these people, heroes and villains, we can read between the lines and see why they make the decisions they do.
Sure. I will say it did drop off a little bit, just in that episode 4, episode 5. I'm not quite sure whether that is because it focuses more on the Susan Ping Cho thing, and I'm a little boy, I'm less interested in the 2 teenage girls getting up to stuff. There's quite a lot of back and forth. I didn't dislike it. It just dropped off just a little bit. It's unfortunate because they changed the director for episode 4 to Peter Crocker, to Crockett.
Davy Crockett.
Yes, that's the one, with his raccoon hat. But
yes,
it wasn't too bad. And then I think the last two episodes is absolutely on point.
To say the 7-part story dips a bit in the middle is hardly the greatest crime.
No.
Well,
No.
it's not without precedent, and it certainly won't. It will certainly be repeated. I think another reason why the first 3 episodes are particularly engaging. Again, coming back to watching it in context, each episode is breaking new ground. Just within those first few episodes, it's showing us so much that's new, and it's constantly moving, changing. So many contrasts, like the setting of starting in the snowy mountains. Only one episode later, we're in the middle of arid desert. We've gone from complete and utter isolation to busy towns and settlements, and all of it feels real.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already compared it to the Daleks, which is a fair thing to do because they're the first 2 future and past stories. They're both 7 episodes long, but the characters here, where Terry Nation panics, and anytime he's got a gap, he'll put some action in. Anytime John Lucarotti's got a gap, he'll fill it with characterization. The characters do things that aren't just in service of the plot here, which shouldn't be a eureka moment. It's just good writing.
There is an irony to praising Lucarotti for changing the location every so often, and then criticising Terry Nation which is exactly what he does in the next story. But anyway, no, you're absolutely right.
That was interesting, isn't it? I guess it's because no, I'm not going to get into that. It's not quite the same, is it?
No.
He literally makes every episode look like a different planet in Keys and Mariners.
Yeah.
Whereas at least here I think they can just shuffle the columns around.
Yeah.
And move that pile of sand from here to there.
Yeah.
It's probably not quite as difficult.
And then after the lull, episodes 4 and 5, you reach a very satisfactory conclusion where you get the mighty Kublai Khan appearing, instructed to appear as the administrator and not the warlord. So there's a little joke in the title there, isn't there? He's not mighty, he's this little withered old guy who's obsessed with numbers. And then you get the bromance going on with the Doctor and Kublai Khan, the comedy of the Doctor's bad back and his kinship with the other old man who's also slightly decrepit. Is that the first instance of comedy?
I think it is. Yeah, I can't think of... Yeah, there's a couple of lame gags in An Earthly Child, and there's a very, very little since then. But this is proper comedy. It's played as comedy.
It is indeed.
And what's particularly enjoyable about this is, as you say, that after the lull in the middle, it saves some of its best material until the end.
Yeah.
He's one of the best. He's had an ace up his sleeve in the character of Kublai Khan. It's a great character. It's not what you're expecting. It shifts gears. It gives you a new tone, in the program's palette of tones. And it's not even just comedy. It starts off as comedy, but then it takes a slight turn, and Kublai Khan becomes an antagonist as well. So yes, terrific stuff. But yeah, the proper comedy, which is if prefiguring bolder experiments like the Romans, I suppose, and
yeah. Oh, but it was better comedy than the Romans in that it was done more sparingly. But
some of it's very subtle. The Doctor's listing at the beginning of the last episode. The Doctor's listing all his winnings.
Oh,
it's just hilarious.
Well, I lolled, Paul. I lolled when he said, "I'm very much afraid all the commerce from Burma for 1 year, sire."
Yeah, that's a great Kappa comedy line.
Isn't it? It's fantastic.
Very impressive.
And the other satisfactory thing in those last 2 episodes is that I'm more with Tatwood than you are, I think, in that it was a bit moustache-twirling villain, Tigana, but it pays off at the end, because you get, even though it's done in short time, you get the full explanation of why he is so villainous and what he has been doing. And it adds this whole great historical context and adds scale. And therefore you become somewhat more sympathetic to why he's been doing what he's been doing. Because up until that point, you are wondering, well, is he just a villain in the piece for villainy sake? But I found it completely satisfactory. Yeah, wonderful stuff. Absolutely marvellous.
And I don't say that he's the best written character ever, but again, Luke Rott has kept that in reserve. The fact that he has a motivation, because this is a children's program, he hasn't felt the need to let us in on that secret before. But it's a good time to tell you at the end. So many of these stories fade away, don't they? So many of these stories play out all their best gags, all their best set pieces, tell you everything you need to know about the characters. Moreover, early on, and by the time you get to the end, you're just running around and tying up all the loose ends. But here, it is still leaving surprises, and then we get a nice big fight. I wish I could see that. It sort of brings me on to the thought of what it would have looked like. Wallace Hussein's direction. There's so many things I like about the way he directs the Tribe of Gum. Well, all 4 of the first episodes, but to the extent that the Tribe of Gum 100,000 BC is in any way watchable, and I don't dislike it as much as a lot of people do, it's all down to Wallace Hussein. The camera work is extraordinary. It's in many ways never bettered in the black and white studio era. And there's also a judicious amount of studio filming for important moments.
Yeah.
Not just the big fight, but certain other moments that he knew would be difficult to accomplish in the video studio. Again, I think it looks $1 million, $100,000 anyway. I'd love to see if he brought the same approach to Marco Polo. I mean, obviously he would have done. But for me, the big question is, would this more leisurely story have played with strength the same way that Tribe of Gum did? I think it would have done.
It sort of thrived under immense pressure in Tribe of Gum, An Earthly Child, didn't he? So when he's in this relaxed setting, you'd like to think that he could be more creative, unless the creativity was forced by the pressure to cover certain flaws or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very different sort of story, isn't it? I mean, he uses a lot of very tight close-ups in Tribe of Gum, not just to cover the fact that the set is very small, but because it's a very claustrophobic, menacing story. Here, with these wonderful sets, he would have probably pulled back as far as he could have done.
Yeah.
If it looked anywhere near as epic as it does from the production photographs, we would have been in for a treat. Another thing that's different, of course, is that the first 4 episodes didn't really give him much of a chance to show how he is as an actor's director. There's only so much you can do. I mean, really, you're just firefighting when you're directing a caveman story. You're just trying to make the actors not look as embarrassing as possible. Here, he has proper characters and he casts proper actors. Again, it's one of the best casts we get in. Well, I think it's an all-time, up there with the all-time best cast, isn't it? I was going to damn it by faint praise by saying the Hartnell era or the 60s or whatever, but
it's an interesting quirk, isn't it, that the 3 of them, Darren Nesbitt, Mark Eden and Martin Miller, all appear in the Prisoner episode, don't they, about the assassinations.
So I gather.
It's Your Funeral.
I haven't watched it for a while.
Go back and watch it.
I will.
So will I. No, they do, and it's true. And it's slightly uncanny seeing them there. I like to think that if you watch that episode of The Prisoner, you might get some sense of how they would appear in Marco Polo, but that's probably completely and utterly untrue.
Considering the way some of the lengths loose cannon often go to, I'm surprised he didn't nick footage from there and try and repurpose it. Maybe that would have been a step too far even for them.
The one thing that did 2 things that watching it this time left an impression on me that I hadn't particularly appreciated before is the Doctor. The thing that threw it into focus was when he's absent in episode 2, largely absent in episode 2, they have to rewrite because he's ill, and they say he's sulking, and that's quite a nice joke. But it threw into focus Hartnell's performance throughout as well, in that he's utterly mad. And my preconception, certainly as a child, about Hartnell in the role is that he always felt a bit fluffed, a bit ad-libbed, lots of bluster about his acting. And when they uncovered that Desert Island Discs or the interview, you got to appreciate a bit more how much of a performance it was. But it was thrown into focus, particularly in this story, by that he's off sulking, line, and then I started to appreciate what else he's doing in there. I mean, he's utterly mad, and he's angry, but he's also giggling his head off a lot of the time. Sometimes within seconds of doing one thing and then the other. There's a bit where he's caught tinkering in the TARDIS, isn't there?
How much of that do you reckon is in the script, and how much is Hartnell just suddenly thinking up a new...
I think it's all in the script, and that is my revelation, if you like, because it was scripted that he was off sulking.
Yeah.
And therefore a character who is capable of sulking is also capable of doing all the other things. There's one bit where, he's caught tinkering in the TARDIS, where he turns on Marco Polo or Tigana and calls him a savage. And then as they cart him off, he's laughing his head off. There's another bit where Ian is trying to explain to Marco Polo why he can't sell off the TARDIS, because they couldn't make another one because they need metal. And Ian says, it's more complex than you can understand. And the Doctor chips in against Ian and says, and neither do you, young man. Castigating him for fighting his corner.
That's a good line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with the plot. It's just purely character. It's reminding us that there are different levels here. It's distinguishing between the various different ways in which our characters are. Because we already know, we've got two Earth... There's different axes. We've got two 20th century people and two very highly intelligent people from an advanced future race. But on the other hand, Susan has the personality of a 15-year-old schoolgirl and gets to show off a lot of her groovy early 1960s slang, doesn't she? Which is, I think, more than anywhere else here. He's certainly picked up on that note. I mean, I don't want to oversell it, but I almost feel like the Doctor's character changes forever during episode 1. It starts with him being as angry as he's ever been. He's so bad-tempered at the beginning of episode 1. And by the end, we see this first fit of hysterical giggling, the first appearance of what I always think of as the season 3 Hartnell Doctor. Yeah. But it starts here.
And he's laughing because he doesn't know what he's going to do. He's trapped, isn't he? And he finds it so utterly hilarious that he doesn't, he hasn't got he's up a tree without a canoe, or whatever the phrase is.
I think it's rather more real and powerful and slightly disturbing than the giggling that Hartnell throws in, giggling and hand rubbing that he does a lot in by his third year, when he's really softened the Doctor so much he's just he's turned into Professor Yaffle. But here, as you say, it's almost bipolar. He's going from one extreme to the other.
Did you enjoy the educational notes?
Yes, I like to learn. Yes, I mean, again, it works better than it really ought to. When they work in... They're not always seamlessly interwoven. Sometimes they're a bit clunky, like... it's rather surprising to find the daughter of a high government official working as a servant in Marco Polo's caravan, where you've got historical placement and describing the setup of the characters and forwarding the plot. Yeah, that's a bit of a placeholder, a bit of dialogue, but it doesn't bother me that they didn't go back and try and make it. I just find it charming. And then the more obvious moments, like Ping Cho's story and the legend of the Hashashins and all that. I would much rather take a break and learn a fairy tale from a distant culture than waste the same amount of time on somebody escaping from a prison cell, running down a corridor and being captured again, If it's padding, then if it's not forwarding the plot, then I'd like it to forward something else. And if that'd be my understanding of another civilization, or even just telling me something about the characters, or making me laugh, any of those things, any combination of all those things, please do that. Yeah. Don't just... But it's a lesson that the program loses.
Yeah, they don't do it again in the same way, do they? I suppose there's a touch of it in the Aztecs, especially on the historical side.
Yeah, the Aztecs should be better because it's tighter, isn't it? But I don't think it necessarily is.
No, it's not.
It's different. No. It's the first really good 4-part story, the Aztecs. I'm going to say that now because we're not going to get to talk about it, are we?
They also... The lessons are doled out per character as well. They're quite like that, especially between Ian and Barbara. Barbara does the historical... Oh, Cathay? Yes, China. And Ian does the sciencey bits. And it really works.
Yes, his explanation of how condensation works, which again isn't gratuitous because he has to explain it to Marco Polo. And that's again because we've got these layers, which is why that nice bit where you have the Doctor set up above Ian who's set up above Marco. Yeah. No, brilliant. Plays out well as drama. No, I think it's terrific.
Brilliant. Any more thoughts on the serial itself, Paul?
As I said before, I think if I could see it, I think if people could see it, there would be no complaints that it's too slow. I mean, the first 5 minutes are the only bits that really feel like typical 60s Doctor Who. The first 5 minutes, which has some rather run-of-the-mill business, like Barbara screams, "Look over there!" But there's nothing there now, Barbara. But it was, I swear. The sort of thing that has me rolling my eyes.
Yeah.
It happens every 5 minutes in a Terry Nation script. But that's all over and done with.
And we're meant to believe it could be we're meant to be expecting a Yeti or something, or a woolly mammoth or something.
So if that was Luca Rotti, it's almost like him saying, "I know this is what you're expecting, but I'm going to take you somewhere different. I'm better than this."
But the telesnaps or the production photographs portray it's actually just a really ordinary looking man in
Pretty
furs.
obviously, yes.
Yeah. My only slight negative, or slightly controversial take is that it might not look as lush as everybody talks about. I think when we had the colour loose cannon and it was more production photographs, you didn't really get a sense of the, apart from in a couple of shots, you didn't really get a sense of the studio-bound, limited nature of it. And then when you've got the more recent photographs, I think you get more of a sense of how it would look.
That's very true. And in the second loose cannon recon, you can tell because they've mixed and matched the two.
Yeah.
So you'll often cut from a very wide view of a set from a particular angle to a much narrower view.
Yeah.
But then, my optimism about how it might look is based on Boris Hassan's camera work from his other serial.
Yeah.
I did notice that I was trying very hard to see if I could see any interesting direction from the telesnaps, and it isn't always obvious because I think a lot of his qualities are in the cutting rather than just the individual framing. It's not like every shot's a work of art, but I think it's the piece as a whole.
Mm.
I did notice one very interesting low angle in the last episode. As I think it was at the beginning of the scrap between Tagana and Marco. Very low camera, which wouldn't have been easy to do in those days. Yeah. So I think there will be things to discover.
Unless they lifted the entire setup 6 feet. Put it on stilts.
Well, it's possible. Wasn't the ceiling only 10 foot high anyway? Back in those days.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So.
Okay.
Well, good. We seem to be unanimous on that. I'm giving it 7 gourds out of 7.
It's missing.
Oh yeah.
We can't watch
thanks
it.
for bringing me back down to earth again.
So, do you fancy its chances of it turning up?
Oh, gold. Not as much as I did a while back. I don't know if you remember, Tim, but there's some heady days when optimism was being chucked around by the bucket load. People were showering each other in optimism.
And other things.
Let's take a step back even before that. For a long time, since people have known, since more information has emerged about sales patterns, people have made a very simplistic assumption that it's more likely to show up because there were more copies made.
Yeah.
Leading to that oft-asked question, why do we not have any of it? Why do we have 3 episodes of Dalek's Master Plan when it was never sold? And we have nothing, not a second of Marco Polo when it was sold to 24 countries? Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4. God, it actually is 24 countries. Okay, that's a good guess. So, and then more recent research, or perhaps not research, but it feels to me fairly recently that a theory has arisen to explain possibly why we might not. Why these 24 copies might not give it an advantage. Do you know the one whereof I speak? I think Mr. Venezis might have come up with it. Most of those copies...
The recall of the stored field.
Yeah,
suppressed field.
All the sales from April 65 through to... in Australia, through to Sierra Leone in July 67 would all, I think, have been stored field. And there's a theory that they might have all been recalled because the BBC took their quality assurance seriously, and they didn't want these substandard copies stay out there in the field after they'd been, because they did go through a systematic program in, was it 67, of
Yeah.
creating new
I don't know when it was,
suppressed
but they
field
did,
copies.
Yeah.
So it's possible. I don't entirely believe they were organised enough to get them all recalled and destroyed just because they were technically inferior, but
But it continued to be sold after that point.
it did, well, to the tune of one. There was one subsequent sale. I mean, the sales are consistent through, it's almost every month, through 65, into 66, and into 67. Well, we're averaging about one a month.
And was
Sales.
the final sale was Ethiopia, presumably?
Yeah, we've got quite a big gap there. We've gone from 67 in Sierra Leone through to Ethiopia, sale in January 71. Now, what do we call that? Back catalogue. Now, that may well have been the only sale of the stored field version.
Yeah.
We've probably used those the wrong way round, but hopefully the listener will know what we meant. So it just so happens, I mean, in terms of, if we're talking about probabilities, which is a mug's game, but the probability of something existing, being at the end of a bicycle chain, is not just an advantage, it's the only way we're going to find a story.
Yeah.
If it was anywhere else in the bicycle chain, we're not going to find it in that country because it was moved on. That's the whole point. Ethiopia is the end of a bicycle chain, possibly the beginning of the bicycle chain. It was a sale to that country. We don't know what happened to it. It might still be there. In terms of foreign sales, foreign archives, it feels like the best chance we have, and there's a deafening silence on it. We don't know if anyone has ever got in touch with with Ethiopian television. We don't know if anyone's visited their archive, and if so, what they found. We're told somebody has, but the results are not forthcoming.
No, indeed not. But 7 years ago, about this time of year, it was Easter weekend when the rumours broke. We started hearing about Marco Polo having been found, and of course, in the October of the same year, we got given Enemy and Webb, and the question remained: well, where was Marco Polo? And the rumours ran so deep that you even had people like Steve Roberts on particular interview doing I always think of George in Blackadder. I think you'll find that Captain Blackadder is completely and utterly guilty of nothing more. He did that a little bit in his interview, didn't he? In that I'm absolutely certain that Phil has Marco Polo. If only because and I think everybody thought it was coming back, and I wonder why it hasn't come back. How could that have been untrue, Paul? Do you have a view?
I mean, Steve qualified his comments later on, but the fact remains that it's pretty much the only time that anybody that close to the action has ever expressed any optimism or near certainty about the recovery of a particular story. And yes, he later said that's only based on the fact that there should be a lot of copies out there. Phil should be tripping over copies of it.
Yeah.
But so
even then, in the context that this is a guy who's out there gathering up everything that's out there, and there's lots to be gathered. Therefore, statistically, it's probable that he will have a copy of Marco Polo.
Yes, I mean, we don't really need to get into the fact that when the rumours running particularly rampant, he was being said to have 3, 4, 5 copies of it. That is not well sourced, to say the least. That seems to be just based on people looking at lists of sales and thinking, well, maybe he might have found, what's the highest number we can get this to? But yes, as you were saying,
the particular rumour that hasn't quite been, well, none of the rumours have quite been answered fully, apart from the passage of time, not producing these things. But the particular rumour that has done the rounds is about this film collector in Melbourne who purported to have copies of a copy of Marco Polo, Power of the Daleks, and was it Evil of the Daleks?
Yes. So this is not a rumour. He did purport to have them.
He did purport to have them. Yes, correct. And that to my mind, and as far as I understand it, hasn't been satisfactorily debunked. And I can talk a little bit about that, in that I've had an account told to me by somebody somewhat involved in the process. And I think for my own peace of mind, that might explain why we thought we were getting a copy and didn't. Would it be interesting to know about that?
I would very much like to know, and I think our listeners deserve to know.
Well, they might deserve to be hearing something they can put no store in. But this is how I understand it panned out. So you have this collector who is found, and I think Paul Venezes has said publicly that it was found as a fallout from the Bell of Doom hoax.
Yeah. Sometime 2011, 2012, I think, wasn't it?
And so a collector was identified who claimed to have these stories. I think Paul has also said publicly that he couldn't believe it because he didn't believe that these copies might exist. And then Damien Shanahan, the man on the ground in Australia, actually argued that there could be copies because of practices at BBC Sydney or however these copies might have been made. And so contact was made with this guy. Now the key thing is, and the key reason that they bought that this story might have legs, and this hasn't been said publicly as far as I know, is that the collector was found and asked. So he wasn't out in the public domain telling people he had these things. He was identified and found and asked what he had, and he said he had these stories.
So for a hoaxer, that's not just an unusual MO. It would make no sense at all. He wasn't.
No. I don't know what the conversation was. He could have been winding them up once he was found, but that's why there was a hook. Now there have been various rumours around, and what I understand happened is that this guy offered, sight unseen, a copy of the 7 episodes of Marco Polo to Damien Shanahan for a fantastic amount of cash, and Damien was unsure as to how to proceed. So what he did, he consulted the team. And I'm led to understand, and I'll put an allegedly here, that Philip Morris's reply was allegedly to say that if you spend all that money on a copy of Marco Polo, if I find one anyway, then you'll have wasted your money, or words to that effect. And I'm led to understand.
If I find one.
If I find one. But Philip Morris, as we know, has a way of saying things in a non-natural way. So that's split opinion amongst the team. And some thought, well, he's obviously got it. And some thought, no, he's saying if I find one, because he fancied his chances. So if we fast forward now to Philip Morris talking to the BBC, I can envisage a situation where Phil has hypothetically said, well, I've got Enemy and Webb, here they are, and you'll get Marco Polo down the line. And when I was talking to a member of the RT in 2014, he told me that Marco Polo was yet to be handed over and to be released at a later date, and that was his understanding of it.
His understanding was not that it was still to be handed over, but that sorry, it was not that it hadn't been, but that it was still planned to be.
Or had been planned to be before the Omni rumour exploded.
Not he wasn't saying that in 2014 it was still planned. He was telling you in 2014 that in 2013 it had been planned.
Yes.
Yeah.
And agreed. So I don't know whether the conclusion is correct, but I'm pretty sure the anecdote is correct. And therefore, for my own peace of mind, I can sort of tie that to that being a way for the BBC to be under the impression that Marco Polo was coming, in that Phil may have responded overconfidently about there being a copy in Australia. But that doesn't answer the investigation to Ethiopia.
It doesn't, no.
No.
And we know Phil has been to Ethiopia.
We do.
We know that this is a fact, but it's also a lot of inference. In the early days when Phil and Paul were discussing the ongoing search on the internet, We got occasional updates as to countries that he'd visited as and when they were ruled out, as and when they were ticked off, they'd been searched, there was nothing there.
Yeah.
And Ethiopia was never mentioned. It was one of many countries that were never mentioned. But it is kind of unique in that it's a country which later, post Enemy and Web reveal in 2013, post that, any discussions post that, Paul and Phil started mentioning that he had been to Ethiopia.
Yes.
They started mentioning it in the same breath as Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, countries that he went to quite early on in 2008. And all of the other countries, in the same breath as which it is mentioned, we know were ruled out. We've had greater or lesser amounts of detail on what he did and didn't find in those countries.
Yeah.
So Ethiopia has got a big glowing neon question mark over it. A friend of ours had a conversation with Paul V at a convention a couple of years ago, as recently as that, where Paul noticeably didn't say that Ethiopia had been ruled out. And in fact, I gather he was still quite open about it. Some positive things about the Ethiopian archival system.
Yeah.
I think Phil has also occasionally said nice things about the Ethiopians.
Yeah.
Just as one-liners in passing.
Yeah.
But no detail. So it's tantalising, isn't it?
Yes, but why on earth we would not receive it, not see it in 7 years is anyone's guess. And,
no, because he had definitely been there by the end of 2012, I think.
Yeah.
The piecing things together, he says that in 2008 he went to Ethiopia. He couldn't get in because they were very good with security at the time.
Yep.
And negotiations took place, and reading between the lines, it may have been 3 or 4 years before he finally got a look, 2011, 2012. So we haven't heard anything, and it makes no sense if his search was successful and the films were repatriated, that we wouldn't have heard anything.
Well, I'm happy to conclude he drew a blank.
Yeah. Looking that way, isn't it?
Yeah. Or he didn't get in. He still didn't manage to crack the red tape.
The way he's told the story makes it as near as damn it that the way he talks about the first visit being a failure, the heavy implication is that he did get in at a later date. In fact, I think he's actually said that.
Yeah.
So.
But then he also said that the station manager in Joss was a really nice guy, and then 30 seconds later was calling him a damnable thief.
He was. Phil's storytelling really keeps you on your toes, doesn't it?
It does.
I
it's
could
one of the
listen to him
joys.
all day with that.
It's one of the joys of listening to him. Anyway.
But it doesn't repay careful study necessarily.
No.
So there we go. We have Ethiopia. I suppose I should probably also mention Nigeria. That's the end of a bicycling route. It was sold to Kaduna quite early on, November 1965. We might have assumed that it didn't exist because Ian Levine didn't track it down in the early 80s. But of course, Ian Levine was also not told about Webb and Enemy. So, who knows? Maybe Marco Polo was still in Kaduna in the early 80s. It wasn't there when Phil got there in 2010-11 because he told us that Kaduna had thrown out all their films. They'd gone out and buried them in the desert.
Well, there was the apocryphal tale of someone ringing the BBC and saying, would you like this copy of season 1 back? And they said, no, thank you very much, they're all out on DVD, and they binned the lot. It was an apocryphal tale, but has now been substantiated by Richard Molesworth.
It has. He has substantiated, yes. He seems to be alone in terms of people who would know the truth or otherwise of that story in being happy to, I say happy in inverted commas, to verify. I'm assuming he's not actually laughing hysterically at like a late Hartnell at the thought of it going up in smoke. But anyway, it does seem, tragically enough, that Nigeria's copy, the Kaduna copy of Marco Polo, went up in smoke, unnecessarily so, somewhere between 1980, Ian's search in the early 80s and Phil's visit in 2010, and very possibly in 1999, because that's when the apocryphal anecdote takes place.
Yes.
People often ask, people who don't want to believe this. I don't imply that the only reason for not believing this apocryphal story is because you psychologically don't want it to be true. You can't bear the thought it's true. But I think, to be honest, for a lot of people that is the case. People say, this doesn't make any sense. How could we have found out about this? If it was known at the time.
Yeah.
back in 1999 when this call was made, something would have been done about it. It wouldn't have been too late to amend the situation.
Yeah.
But the only way I can imagine that it might have been discovered is that if it was discovered, there might have been paperwork to that effect, which was found at the Nigerian end. It's possible that nobody at the BBC end, the London end, knew about this for 10 years or so.
Yeah, indeed.
Phil said he's found a lot of paperwork in his travels.
And I imagine, I believe that's the case. Yeah, I believe that's the case. But you say up in smoke, it could have been buried in the desert, and therefore he could have ridden out to it on his JCB, as he has explained. But then,
with a scarf around his head and a big bottle of water. If
he's already got a copy, then why would he be trying to dig up one in the Kaduna bush?
I wonder when he was digging up the Kaduna bush. Well, if it was during his initial foray into Nigeria, which we think was possibly late 2010, early 2011, it could have been the first copy of Marco Polo he came across, which is why he was so desperate that he went to all the trouble of digging in the desert for it. This is much more apocryphal. He's mentioned 3 or 4 times in public that he's dug up a rubbish tip. Every time he tells the story, it inches closer to resolution. It's now 2 or 3 years since the final iteration of that story, where he had successfully retrieved film cans and had taken them back to his tier lab to check through them, and we've heard nothing. So I'm very, that's on my short list of things I'm looking forward to finding out more about in his book. Even if it was just mush, it's still it would be a fascinating story to actually find.
That's no way to call his book. Anyway.
Any other? There's no. Yeah. We if we went into any of the other rumours, we'd be mining.
We'd be here for 7 years.
Yeah. One of the only other places it could have been is, oh dear, is it Ghana? They sold the first 5 stories to Ghana. So theoretically, if it didn't get bicycled on, there could be one there. But of Ghana, we've heard nothing. So
no. Anyway, let's stop yakking on about this rumour. It's not appeared. We can't watch it. We have wonderful telesnaps. We have the audio. We have the book. And we're very lucky that it is the most substantial part of the first 2 years that is missing, in that it could be a heck of a lot worse.
Yes. What a lovely positive note to end on. But good. I wish it was Keys of Marinus and one episode of The Edge of Destruction that was missing instead.
Oh, you don't like Keys of Marinus either? Oh, that's comforting.
It's fine.
Good. We are of one mind. Anyway, listeners, that concludes our review of Marco Polo, and indeed our first episode of this podcast project. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope Paul has enjoyed it. Paul, have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, it's always good to chew the fat.
So please do, listener, give us feedback, get in contact with us. I'm available on Twitter at Dr. Who Podcasters. Paul is available on Twitter at Mr. Paul Morris. Have I got that right?
I don't encourage conversation, but if anyone out there desperately wants to know something, or just send bouquets and brickbats, you know where I am.
And indeed, as a fledgling podcast that can only go on for so long because it's a finite number of stories we'll be reviewing, it would be greatly appreciated if you share it and tell people about it, so that we find our maximum potential audience, because at the moment it's just my mum and Paul's wife.
What a horrifying prospect.
And there we go. Thanks so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.